Okay, looks. I don't think we have anybody in chat yet. Let's see how things are going. It'd be pretty depressing if nobody showed up. This was pretty hyped up. I think wait for the Discord announcement to come through. And yeah, let's see. Shoot, that's tomorrow. Oh, let's go. Okay. Okay, looks like nobody is here yet. Just because of how VODs work, I'm probably going to start this maybe within 5 minutes if nobody shows up at all, which I hope doesn't happen. Hopefully at least Bex comes in. It's announced on the stream. Oh shoot, we have 3 viewers already. What the heck? How did we spike so suddenly? What? Am I trolling? Okay. Hopefully, if there are people, welcome. My name is Dylan Nguyen, unless, if you guys are new to the stream. We're going to be starting pretty soon. As soon as we get, probably, Bex is probably the marker for when we can start, because Bex tends to be most active. It doesn't seem like he's online right now. But, yeah, hopefully you guys are ready to have some fun and learn some stuff about the SAT. Yeah, we're just gonna wait a little bit. Y'all can chill, just grab a drink, get some water. It's gonna be a long stream today. Oh, let's go. We got Bonnie. Somebody else, looks like. Okay. Yeah, okay, we're gonna start 6:35 just to set a time on it so I don't wait too long. In the meantime, if you guys have not already, make sure to follow us on Twitch because that gets you entered into our giveaway for our OG hoodie, which looks like this. Link in the chat right now. And if you guys ever want to come on the stream, if you guys want to co-host the stream with me, or if you guys have any questions that you want to ask but you can't make it to the stream or you don't want to ask in chat, there are also links in the link tree for co-hosting the stream or for asking questions. And if you click on that link in the link tree, you can ask them and I'll answer them on the stream, or you can co-host the stream with me. So yeah, in about 2 minutes we're gonna get started. Where's Bex? Yeah, it says we have 6 viewers. I'm really confused because it says there's only 2 people watching. But yeah, hopefully Bex shows up. If not, we'll still get started. Sorry for making you guys wait, by the way. Hopefully you guys are chilling, having a good day. Friday's pretty nice. Hey, what's up, Eho? Let's go. This is it's just so stressful now because now there's people that I know that are here. Oh, what's up, Justin? Oh, I forgot to tell. Shoot, I didn't tell Board to go to this thing. I'm so dumb. Hopefully the stream doesn't get too scuffed. I prepared most of it last week. Okay. David's at swim. Oh wait. So why are you not at swim, Ethan? What's that about? Crippled. What'd you do? Did Andrew hit you or something? What did you do? How'd you cripple yourself? Okay, yeah. So it's 6:35. Terrible. What happened? Sounds terrible. But okay. So looks like Bex hasn't shown up yet, but we need to start because I don't know how long this is gonna go. Oh, thank you for following me. Oh, Ethan. Okay, so just to give you guys a structure of what the stream is going to look like, we're going to start off by just briefly reviewing what the SAT is. If you guys haven't already, please check out our first VOD. Go to our link tree, which we've already linked in the chat. Go to our link tree, go to our VODs. The first VOD talks more in depth about the SAT. I'm just going to go very briefly into what the SAT is and just generally what it tests. And then after we review what it is, I'm gonna talk about if you should even take it, because for the most part, I think that the majority of people should not be taking the SAT just because of what colleges even accept it, and if like it's not super important anymore, not as much as it was several years ago. And then we're gonna get into the meaty, juicy stuff, how I got the 1600, how maybe you guys can get the 1600, and then we're gonna do some practice problems on stream. We're gonna basically do it together, and yeah. If you guys ever have any questions, make sure you guys ask them whenever. This is a more informal system, so you guys can just, whenever you guys got a question, you guys just put it in the chat. So yeah, if there are any questions, you can put them in now. I'm just realizing there's a typo in this scene. Wow. Okay. So SAT. Okay, it stands for Scholastic Assessment Test. Nobody knows that. Nobody needs to know that. But basically, the point is that colleges want to know that you are capable of English and math. Like you're capable enough to do well in college. And that's how the test is divided. There's an English section, there's a math section, and it's scored so that you can get, like, based on how many you get right, you can get a score between 200 and 800. So even if you get 0 correct, you can get a 200 out of 800. And the score that you get is going to be a multiple of 10. So you can't get like a 799 out of 800. You can't get like a 793.5. You have to get something that's a multiple of 10, like 790, 780. And your scores from the math section and the English section are added up to make 1600. Or that's if you get a perfect score in each part. And yeah, so like for me personally, I probably, if I got, I think based on the report, I think I got one question wrong, but because of the way that the SAT is scored, it did not drop me down all the way to a 1590. So technically I didn't get a perfect score. I got a 1600, which is a little bit different, but nobody cares. 1600 is all that matters, right? So yeah, that's what the SAT is. If you guys want more information on that, I can talk about it, but I would just recommend you guys check the first VOD on our VOD channel. Again, I'll link it again just in case people have missed it. The link tree is there, and you guys can find whatever you need inside of that. Okay, yeah. Any questions so far? Sorry if I'm talking a little bit fast. I just want to make sure I get to the important stuff without missing too much. Interesting how. Whoa, it's Ben. Ben showed up. Epic. What's up, Ben? There's so many people here that never come to these streams. Thank you. Welcome to the stream for everybody who's new. So yeah. Yeah, there's so many. This is actually epic. Okay, sorry, I'm getting off track. Okay, so the next thing is, okay, you have a general idea of what the SAT is, but there's a big question is like whether you should take the SAT. First of all, it's like $55, and secondly, that thing is really hard. It hurts your brain. But yeah, so the main decision is recently, especially with the pandemic, what happened, like already people were moving away from having the SAT as like a requirement for college admissions, but recently because of the pandemic, there's been these issues of like inequality and like, oh, do people have equal access to this? This is like more of like, oh, if you can go to a prep academy, it's a lot easier for you to get a higher score than you normally would. So like there's this whole controversy, and recently a lot of colleges have been moving away from the SAT and the ACT. And thankfully in California, we have a very, very good public school system called the UC system. If you guys don't know what that is or you don't know much about it, I would recommend you check our interview with Nelly out. That is also in the VODs channel. But yeah, so the UC system, also the CSUs and community colleges, all three of those, as of like this is the last year that you can submit SATs. Like if you're a senior this year, and in the following years, so starting next year, they will not even accept SAT scores at all, or ACT. Sorry, I should drink water. So where was I? Yeah, so the UC system, CSUs, and community colleges do not accept SAT at all. So if you 100% plan on going to a public college in California, I would say there's zero purpose in taking the SAT unless you want to gratify your ego, unless you want bragging rights, because it's like 55 bucks that you'll never get back and a whole lot of time and brain power that just completely destroys you. I would not recommend it. Yeah, and I'll get into that later, how like the SAT, honestly, I got the 1600, right? It sounds like, oh, it was so easy. It was disgustingly hard. Like would I would do it again because I got the 1600, but I would not recommend that experience to anybody. Like I remember this, I'm not trying to throw any shit at all. I'm just saying like, so Riley was like, oh, you should retake the SAT for funsies. And like, it sounds like it's fun. It's like a test, like, ooh, yeah, I'm gonna get the 1600 again. But it is the most, like, it is, I can't put into words. I can't articulate how bad it is to take the SAT. It is really like brain numbing. Like, I can't describe it. You don't want to take that thing for fun. That is not an enjoyable experience. So yeah, and also there's this in the past there were SAT scholarships, which basically meant that if you got these super high scores like 1600, 1590, 1580, 1570 out of 1600, you were going to be eligible for scholarships. But because of the rise of like SAT prep academies and just in general, the population has become smarter. There's just not as much emphasis on this, and like not only is there less money available, SAT scholarships is just like, oh, sure, you're smart, but that doesn't show enough for people to want to give you money. So on the whole, I would say if you're going to a public school in California, do not take the SAT. So what if you are taking if you want to go to a private school in California or a private school outside of California, or even a public school outside California? And in that case, this is where, because these are not like private schools, both inside and outside California, and outside of state public schools, because they're not under the same regulations as like the UC system and the CSU system and the community colleges in California, because they live almost under a different rule set. It's going to be very different depending on where you go. Because some public schools, and like I heard like University of Alabama, they still accept SAT, ACT. May not may not be true anymore, but it's highly dependent on what school you want to go to. And just like I talked about before, if you have an idea of what school you want to go to, just go to the school's website and search up their policy on SAT, ACT. Sometimes they'll call it standardized testing requirements or policies. And that will give you a much better idea of whether you should even take it at all. And usually they'll say that they don't require it, or that they're test blind. I feel like very schools right now, very few schools are test blind right now. Most of them are test optional, in which case you have to make a decision. And sort of the decision you have to make is that there are a lot of variables. So you can think about how important, like if you just look at my profile on paper, how important is academics in my profile? Like if you're like Mika and you're just like an amazing tennis player, academics is not so important. Or if like you have these like, if you're like CEO of like a nonprofit or like an actual business, and you've like you just if you have something else that is stellar on your profile, I would say it's not so important for you to risk taking the SAT, or I guess unless you're rich, but I don't think it's worth taking the SAT if it's not important to have a strong academic profile. And that would be the opposite of the case for me. I personally like I'm on varsity tennis, but I'm not good. I have some clubs, but I'm not that like it's nothing exceptional. So like based on like just sort of my strategy, I sort of have a more well-rounded profile. So it's necessary that I do have this strong academic profile, which is why I took the SAT for private schools specifically, because public schools in California do not take it. Also, in addition to just like your profile, also just how good are you at academic stuff. Like I personally am just good at taking tests, and that's really crucial because so how do I put this? When I was taking practice SATs, the first time I took them, I got really high scores, partially because I already know most of this content, but also because I'm very fortunate to have strong test taking skills, which doesn't sound like it exists, but test taking skills are very important for tests in general, because most of school you're going to be tested on things, and the ability to take multiple choice tests and do well is super powerful. And this is almost like a lot of times like some people have it more developed than other people, and I think this is something you can develop through practice as well. So in addition to academic ability, in addition to how important academics is to your profile, you also have to look at the colleges you're going to, if you really need an SAT score to go to the college you want to go to, and there's just a bunch of different variables. So I would say if there are a lot of things that you have to consider, I would, like I've said before, talk to your guidance counselor because they are very knowledgeable when it comes to this stuff. They've had several years of experience, and I would trust them more than some dude who happens to go to your school and happen to get a good score on the SAT. So yeah, that is whether or not you should take the SAT. I'm going to go into the format now, but are there any questions? For the most part, it seems like chat is not super active without Bex, but let's chill. Okay, doesn't look like we have questions. So yeah, we're going to starting to get into the juicy stuff. Um, uh, I'm not quite sure how to properly portray this. I did not prepare an image or a table like I did during the first stream just because of how much school has been taking over stuff. So I apologize in advance for that. But we're going to review, actually, I can probably do this. We're going to review the format of the SAT more in depth than we did in our first stream. So let's see if I can make this work. Okay. Some dude equals God. Honestly, I don't have a good response to that. Okay, perfect. I think I got it. Sorry for the wait, guys. I just slide this thing over here. Uh-oh. Hopefully stream does not crash. I'm trying to make this not crash right now. Okay. Let me know if you guys cannot see what I'm screen sharing right now. Actually, yeah. Jesus Christ, $200? How much does it cost? Jesus Christ. Okay, yeah, I'm assuming that everybody can see this, so I'm just gonna get started into the format of the SAT. I know that all of you guys can read, but I'm gonna go into it more in depth. So first of all, the format of the test is that when you go in to take the test. All right, perfect, Bunny. Thank you very much yeah. So when you get into the test, the first section of the SAT you will take is the reading. And so the English section of the SAT is divided into reading and writing/language, which you can see right there. And like it says up there, 52 multiple choice questions in 65 minutes for the reading. And what that looks like is you have this passage. And we'll look at these passages later. We're going to go over examples and go through my thought process. But essentially, you have this passage that you read, and you have these questions that follow. They usually like pertain to the passage as a whole, or just certain sections or certain paragraphs. And the passages, they all tend to fall within the same category, or like the same categories every time. We're going to have one social sciences, so something about like either histories or like a study. And then you're going to have one natural science, which is just basically sciences. So usually some new technology or some like solar panel. I don't know. I remember having solar panel ones. And you also have some not ancient literature, but like older American literature. It's like 1800s. And those tend to be a little bit more difficult to understand because just old English is harder. And also you're going to have a passage where there will be two different passages about a topic, and they're going to ask you to like, what is the same? What is different? What does this author say that this author doesn't say? What would these authors agree on? What would these authors disagree on? And those tend to be the hard questions. That is the format of the reading. We're going to look at questions sample questions later, so if this is a little bit abstract, hopefully I can make this a little bit more concrete in a bit. Now for the writing/language, this one, honestly, this is the one I struggled with the most at the beginning, but this is also the thing that you can sort of develop the skills for, and not necessarily guarantee, but to increase greatly your odds of getting a perfect score on this section. Because this section, there's usually a very clear right or wrong, whereas reading, a lot of times reading could be a little bit more subjective, like the main theme of a passage can be different depending on how you want to interpret it. So this, personally, I feel like these three, oh my god, sorry. No, these sections, the writing and reading and the math sections, tend to be a little bit easier to get those high scores on, whereas reading, at least for me personally, reading tends to be a little bit more abstract, and this happened to be where I got my one question wrong. So yeah, writing/language. So the key thing here to notice is this part. You have 44 questions in 35 minutes, which means that you have to do more than one question per minute. And I would say throughout the whole test, usually you will be relatively crunched for time. You're not going to have a lot of time to answer and then check your answers and check your answers again. You just don't have time for that unless you're just speed running the whole thing. But even though it seems like it's a lot, we're going to get into this later, but it's actually not as bad as the reading section, just because the types of questions it's going to ask is like, it'll go through like a passage, and at certain points there will be like a number, like let's say 1, and that 1 corresponds to the first question. So let's say like there's a 1 next at the end of a sentence, and that corresponding question would say like, oh, what is the proper way to end this sentence? Is it a period? Is it an exclamation point? Is it a semicolon? Or is it a comma? And it's like, those are the type of questions that would be in the writing/language. Things like, oh, what is the best way to combine these two sentences? Oh, should you delete the sentence, or should you replace it with something better, or should you just keep it as it is? And sometimes it can feel a little bit subjective, but you can actually figure out this sort of science, or like the structure of these questions, and figure out how to answer these questions best, which I'm going to get to in a bit. Hopefully this is not too complicated yet. If there are any questions, again, you guys can ask whenever you want. I'm going to try to make this section faster because, honestly, this is the really boring part, but it's necessary for the people who are new to this stuff. Okay, so it looks like not any questions so far. So the math section, I'm going to be honest, I think my advice for the math section is not going to be as valuable for you guys, just because math is my strong suit, and it's something that I personally have not struggled with very much. So yeah, I apologize for that. I just don't know how to give actual advice. I personally tend to get really good scores, usually a perfect score in the math when I take practice tests, but I can give you guys a general format. So the math is divided into two sections. There's a calculator section and a no calculator section. And they both cover the same topics, but it's just that some questions will be like, some questions will not necessarily require, but it will be a lot easier if you do have a calculator. And the no calculator section, usually it's very simple math, or mainly conceptual. And there are, I would say, three main topics that are covered in the math section. The first is sort of Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and I would not recommend you take the SAT until you have completed Algebra 2, especially Algebra 2 trig. That would be ideal. So the reason why is because the test will cover both of these things, even though Algebra 2 is more of like a sometimes it'll be on there, and it's not as like, it's not intensely hard. It'll be a lot easier for you, and you'll feel a lot more comfortable if you've already taken the class. So Algebra 1, Algebra 2 stuff is like solving equations, slope-intercept forms, like standard form, solving like square roots and exponential functions, which is pretty hard, to be honest. Factoring polynomials, quadratic formulas, solving systems of 2 or even 3 equations. Sometimes you'll have word problems, which suck. And also finding domain and range, which also is pretty tough. This math is not easy. I remember in my first stream I said it was easy. That was just me not knowing how bad it is, because I just had not experienced the actual SAT. This math is not easy. This is something that you will have to practice if you are not already very well versed in it. So that's Algebra 1 and Algebra 2. The second section is probability slash statistics, which hopefully I think for the majority of people, if you guys hate math, usually this section tends to be a little bit easier. It's like mean, median, modes. You just add it up, divide by how many there are, like you order them, find the middle. Mean, median, modes pretty basic. Reading graphs or tables or scatter plots, I would say that's not too bad either. It's like, oh, if there's like 10 people who are bald and 10 people who have hair, what is the chance that you are bald? And it's like, oh, 50%. Those ones I would say not too bad. I would say usually Algebra 1, Algebra 2 is a little bit more difficult. Actually, no, that's probably the most difficult stuff in the math section because the last section is geometry and trigonometry. Depending on how you feel with geometry and trigonometry, this can be the hardest part, especially trigonometry. But the main stuff is like triangle theorems, so stuff like not necessarily similar triangles like side angle side, but that knowing that will be useful. I remember there was one question on my SAT that was actually extremely difficult for me to remember just because it's been so long since I've done geometry. So remembering like side angle side, angle side, side, honestly, it sucks to remember, but it's on the test, and I would recommend that you know it. And also for trig, it's stuff like what is a sine, like there's also a formula sheet. I'm not sure if you guys knew, but there is a formula sheet that they provide, and it is useful sometimes. So there's like you have to know sine, what sine means, cosine, tangent means, but nothing crazy. And also like complementary angles, supplementary angles, like alternate angles, vertical angles. Hopefully, this is this is stuff you will have covered in your geometry class, but it is still stuff that you'll have to review if you don't remember much of it. And that's all that they cover in the math section. It's a lot, but it's not such a vast amount that's so deep that it's impossible to prepare for. This is stuff that you can prepare for. And if you guys have any questions, like if you guys have any like questions specifically about stuff and it's like a little bit too in depth to ask on stream, you guys can DM me. This is my Instagram. Let's see. That's my Instagram. Should I submit? Okay, yeah, that's my Instagram. You can DM me on there, or how do you get better at testing? Okay, I'm going to hold one. Like, yeah, let me think actually. Yeah, okay, so if you could hold that thought for a bit, because we're going to get more in depth. We're about to get into that because there are, yeah, testing is a very deep thing we can get into. So, are there any other questions? Sorry, Bonnie, for just sort of pushing aside your question. We will get to it, I promise. Okay, doesn't look like there's any other questions. There is also, I said there was reading, there's writing language, there's the no calculator section, and there's the calculator section. And there's also, I didn't know this until test day, so I was absolutely terrified when I found this out. There is a fifth section that they add in, and it's not like it's not new. It's not like there's science or history on it. They just take another section, it's like another reading section or another writing slash language section, another math like calculator or no calculator section. They add one of those and stick it at the very end, and it's not known what the purpose of it is. There's like some theories. So like one of them is that oh they do it to prevent cheating because the actual thing you get, the actual questions you get are completely randomized. So if you happen to have some cheating system with like the person sitting next to you, that would not work because you guys have different tests. So if your scores are very different from what they are on the rest of the tests, that would be one way to detect cheating. And also another thing that, like another theory that seems viable is that they're trying to test out new questions. And like they're trying to test like, oh, is this type of question going to like, sorry, is this type of question like easy for everybody? Is this hard for everybody? Just that sort of thing. And it's not actually known whether or not this section contributes to your score. I would say it's probably not, but at the same time, College Board does not confirm this, and that makes sense because if it did not count, then people would not try on the questions, which means that the College Board would not get good data on how good or bad the questions are. So yeah, that's just the general format. Also, you see, if you look right here, it says the SAT essay. Oh, sorry, the SAT essay. This actually has been discontinued as of June 2021, which was last year in June. So the SAT essay actually no longer exists. which means that colleges do not accept it because it literally does not exist anymore. So yeah, if you ever see that, just know that this article is probably outdated by maybe a year and a half or two, is my guess. So yeah, that is all that we have about the format of the SAT. This is the part where we're going to get into how to test, answering Bonnie's question, and how I got a 1600. So yeah, any questions? Okay, looks like we don't have any questions. Oh, sorry. Let's see. Okay, so that's all we have here. Let's switch back to this. Hopefully you don't mind seeing my face for another hour. Okay, so what we're going to get into now is how I got a 1600. And unfortunately, it's not going to be as glorified as you might expect. It's not this 6-month grind of 2 hours a day, and like I wake up and I grind for an hour, I go to, and I grind for an hour. No, that did not happen. There are a couple of things I went into it. I would say there's three main components. I would say not necessarily the biggest one, but a very critical one was just luck in general. Because the way that you get a 1600 on the SAT is that you have to get basically every single question on the math section correct, and you can get maybe one or two wrong on the reading/language questions to get the 1600, because otherwise it'll drop you down to a 1590, which obviously is still a very, very good score. But I'm just saying, to get the 1600 that I got, there's a lot of luck that goes into getting that like perfect score, or not perfect score, I guess, because I got one wrong. But it is not something that I was able to like game the system. Like that is something that's extremely lucky to get that score, and I very much recognize that. And I could have just as easily gotten a 1570, because a lot of people have this misconception that like the more you study, like studying like would guarantee you a higher grade, which is not the case. Because even if you study actually like well, you study intentionally, you're very focused, and you're learning all this new information. You can't guarantee that you'll get a perfect score on. You can't guarantee an A+ in a class. It's just not how it works, because all you can guarantee is that you study, and then whatever grade you get on the test is the grade you get on the test. Oh, I'm realizing what happened to chat. I'm realizing now chat has not been showing on the overlay. Sorry about this, guys. What happened to chat? Sorry about this, guys. This is kind of important. Where's chat? Chat box. Oh, interesting. Let's see if I type something in right now. It happens. Oh, it shows up now. My bad. It seems like it just was not there earlier. Sorry about that, everybody. That was unprofessional. Okay. So yeah. In addition to luck, because that's not very glorified or fun to talk about, there's also a bunch of unintentional preparation. Oh shoot, what happened? Sorry about that. So there's a bunch of unintentional preparation that happened, because sure, like the SAT is a weird test, and there's going to be some weird questions that you'll never have seen before. But at the same time, they're going to be testing you on subjects you've already learned about, stuff like the math you've probably learned in school, English you've learned in school. And because I've always paid attention in classes, I've always done well in classes because I've paid attention, because I've put the work in, and also because I happen to I've happened to inherit very good at genetics, and I'm very thankful for that. Because I've sort of had this accumulation of previous preparation, I didn't have to prepare as much before the SAT. So like just in general, I usually do very, very well in math. That's like one of my strongest things, like just as a person in general. I'm very good at math. And then English, that I wouldn't say I'm better at English than math, but my English is also something that I've developed over time, taking a lot of difficult classes and also learning a lot. So I guess one of the main things is that even though you would assume that somebody who gets to 1600 is either insanely smart or they prepared a lot, I would say it's like a little bit of both. Because I would say, sure, I happen to have inherited nice genetics, but at the same time, there's also been a very like if you stuck me in the middle of like Afghanistan and you raised me there, I would not have the same amount of knowledge or like understanding that I do now. And that's because like not only have I had access to education, but I've also pushed myself within that education and I've learned a lot. And it's because I've like over like the past decade-ish, I've done well in school. And that's the reason why I did not have to prepare as much. And this is something that I would say applies in general life, which is like if you always are doing your best, like you don't do things just because you want the grade, you're actually doing your best in every moment throughout life. A lot of the time, the things that you have done will come back and help you in a way you don't expect, which like sounds like really abstract, and I know it is, and I can't really think of a concrete example, but I would argue that I wouldn't argue, but like I'm just from experience, I would say that it is deep. Yeah, I know. It took me. It's just crazy how like there are so many things that have just come back from like a long time in the past that have helped me just because I happened to put the effort in like 5 years ago. So like I don't know how to explain it, but just because I've put a bunch of effort in the past, it's almost like an investment. I've been all this time I've been investing effort, and because I have so much in the bank, I don't have to like deposit so much, right? I don't have to like suddenly deposit a bunch in order to spend it. Like I don't have to study a bunch to get to do well in the SAT because I've already got so much in the bank. And I would recommend that all of you guys do that because it's very like just because you spend a lot of time in like let's say you invest a bunch into your education. Education like investing in your education doesn't mean not only that you get good grades, but it also means that you're very good at critical thinking, which means that you do better when it comes to problem solving, which means you're better at jobs. You are more desirable when it comes to interviews. You are more desirable as a like an employee. You're also more desirable as a leader. You're like just in general. When you invest your time and effort into things that apply across multiple areas, such as education, on the whole, your life will be better. And I don't know how we went from talking about SAT to how to improve your life, but personally, I believe that this is very valuable. Yeah, I don't know how I went on that tangent, but yeah, that's the second of the three. And the third is what everybody expects, which is intentional preparation, where I practice to prepare for the SAT. TED Talk. Dude, honestly, before this thing, I was so anxious, dude. I don't know how people, like, I don't know. So yeah, before I get into how I prepare for the test, are there any questions? Because I just went on this abstract tangent for like 5 minutes. I'm sorry. Man, it's not the same without Vex, man. Vex's questions are always so valuable. But okay, so if there aren't any questions, I'm going to get into preparing for the test. And this will be an interactive part of the stream, okay? So you guys, hopefully you guys can sort of bounce off of me. So let's say you're like, okay, just in general, how do you guys think you get better at something? This is sort of a cliche, but we're going to start here. How do you get better at anything? Sports, life. Okay, no, I jumped to life pretty fast. Like sports, skills, reading. Why is there only an English and a math section? Short answer is I don't know why there's only a math and an English section. I can guess, and my guess would be that on the whole, yeah, okay, thank you, Bunny, that you're correct. But just to answer your question, um, I would say that like just in general, like you guys, I don't know if this is something that you've observed in your own experience, but I found that schools in general tend to emphasize a lot more on math and English as the main subjects and science and history as more supplementary background subjects. So like let's say for instance in my middle school, I went to Stacy and at Stacy the English like my English classes, I guess my English class and my math class were double the length of my other classes. Like my other classes had 40-minute periods, and my English class and my math class each took 2 periods. So they took 80 minutes plus the passing period, which was 4 minutes. So English and math took 84 minutes, whereas the other classes only took 40 minutes. ACT, okay. ACT science, it's science. It's not like biology or geology or like chemistry. When I took one practice ACT, and also practice ACTs are not necessarily representative of the actual thing. But when I did take the ACT, my understanding of what the science section is just reading graphs and reading data. And I guess, yeah, that's what you do as a scientist. You read data, you interpret data, you can make conclusions off of the data. But on the whole, the science part of the ACT, I would say, is the statistics and probability section of the math part of the SAT. Sorry. And yeah, I sort of just circumvented the question, Bonnie. I would just the real answer is I don't know why, but I would say like on the whole, the American education system puts a large emphasis as English and math, probably because English is like important because communication is really important in life in general, and math because basically all the sciences except biology, I guess, but even biology, all the sciences are based off of math, and you can also encapsulate some of history within English. But on the whole, I think just in general, American society does not place as much value on history. And then science, I guess they would cover the math section. Hopefully that answers your question. Sorry that I don't know the answer. Chi-squared. Oh my god, dude, when he did that calculation in class, I was like, oh. But yeah. Okay. Are there any other questions? That was a really good question, actually. I didn't think about that. Thank you for the question. I hate chi-squared, David. Stop lying. Dude, when he brought it up, I forgot how to do it. I just remembered there's squares and stuff. Oh, meow meow cat kicks dirt over pee. What is that? That's like molar mass times like dirt. Shoot, molar mass is equal to distance times gas law constant times temperature. No. Oh yeah, over pressure. Oh my god. Oh, it's been so long. I forgot all of chemistry. Okay, sorry for the for the people who have been in chemistry and bio. Another tangent. But okay, so going back to what Bonnie answered, which is the way to get better at anything is practice. But there's a saying where that goes like, practice makes perfect. And the common response is that that's not true. What practice does is make permanent. What you practice becomes permanent. I think this applies to everything in life. But once again, I don't want to go on a tangent. But um, I would say you want to be very careful about how you practice, which is why before, when I was talking about how I prepared, I said that I did unintentional preparation and intentional preparation. I didn't just say preparation and like I didn't just say preparation. There's a very big difference between intentional preparation and just like intentional practice and just practice. So I would say there are a lot of questions when it comes to practice, like what do I practice, how do I practice, what like just in general, there's just a bunch of questions about it. And we're going to start off with what should I practice? And if you think about the mantra, right, practice makes permanent, you want to be practicing exactly what you're going to be doing on the exam, right? So this is answering Bonnie's question from a couple minutes ago. But what you are going to do on the exam, that is, you should be practicing exactly that. Because if you do that, if you practice exactly what you're going to do on the exam, then you're going to have already that neural synapse in your brain, those connections forming that will like they're the exact same thing. You don't have to adjust because they're the same thing. Like obviously the questions will be different, but at least understanding the format of the question, the content of the question, that will remain relatively uniform regardless of what SAT like test you take. So when I sort of prepared the stream, I thought about this book that I read. And it's not a book I would recommend you guys read because it's pretty dense, but it's by Malcolm Gladwell. If you guys are in AP Lang, we read David and Goliath by Malcolm Gladwell. And the book I'm talking about is Outliers. And in Outliers, Malcolm Gladwell talks about this idea of deliberate practice. This would sort of come to revolutionize the self-help industry. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Outliers, I would not recommend you read it because like it's super dense. Like sure, it's, like some of it's interesting, but like the book itself, like there are so many references to like numbers and studies and like these big massive words. But Outliers came out. I was surprised to hear that it came out in 2008 because people still talk about it today. just because of how good of a book it is. But the main sort of lesson from Malcolm Gladwell was that to become great, you must do deliberate practice. And the world-class masters of the world, on average, they have around 10,000 hours of deliberate practice under their belts to become world class. And I'm not saying you need to spend 2,000 hours to get a 1,600 on the SAT, or 10,000, sorry, 10,000 hours. But the point I want you guys to get is deliberate practice. And sort of the question is, okay, how is deliberate practice different from normal practice? And I like the definition that James Clear gave, who is the author of another, like actually probably my favorite self-help book, which is Atomic Habits. And we should spend no Ito, stop. Okay. Okay, so the quote was while regular sorry, I should drink water. So the quote is, while regular practice might include mindless repetitions, deliberate practice requires focused attention and is conducted with the specific goal of improving performance. And I can copy paste that quote because I think it is actually very good. So that's James Clear, by the way. Very good author, very good books. His book sold 1 million copies on Amazon. That's absolutely crazy. But yeah, he's just an amazing person. And yeah, so I really like the definition because it sort of highlights the difference between what people usually do and what you should do. Because to improve at anything, you have to use deliberate practice. Because sure, regular practice you can slowly improve, but it's not the same as deliberate practice, and we'll get into why. So before we sort of try to apply deliberate practice to the SAT, I want to just sort of get more in depth on what deliberate practice is. So we're going to take an example that I wouldn't say that I know it well, but I would say that it's easier for me to talk about because I have some understanding of it, which is tennis. I play tennis. I play varsity tennis for Marina High School. And we're going to talk about how I've personally been, surprisingly enough, recently, over the past maybe 2-3 weeks, as I've been preparing this stream, I've sort of incorporated deliberate practice into how I practice at tennis. So I would say, average Joe, when you practice tennis, you go out, get your racket, get your balls, go out with a friend, you hit some balls, maybe you play a set, and you go home. That's all you do. You just hit some balls, you rally, you play a set, maybe you lose, maybe you win, maybe you hit some amazing shots, maybe you hit some absolutely disgusting shots. And that's all that happens. That's the end of the day. Just go home. And even though it sounds like I'm sort of dissing them, this is just I feel like this is so common because even now, even after I prepared for the stream, I still do this sometimes because it's just so easy. You just go out and you have a good time. You play tennis. But if you really want to improve, you have to employ deliberate practice. And the question is, how do you do that? So the first step, in my opinion, of deliberate practice is isolating all of the individual skills or parts of the thing that you want to get good at. So if you take tennis for an example, so if you think about how tennis goes, this is going to be very, very high level, and this is going to be we're just going to abstract away a bunch of details, and this is not accurate to the sport at all, but for the purposes of this example, I'm going to say this. So the general pattern of tennis is you hit the ball, goes over the net, lands on the opponent's side. The opponent gets ready to hit the ball. They hit the ball, goes over the net, lands on your side, then you hit the ball again. It goes back in, repeats over and over again. That's the general cycle, right? But if we were to decompose this, you could apply almost a skill. Oh, wait, was I supposed to do something with this? No. Okay, yeah. So, oh, shoot. Sorry, guys. I'm getting a call. Sorry, guys. My grandpa. Hello? Shoot, I'm so sorry, guys. Hello? Okay. Hey John, what? Love you. Yeah, I'm so sorry, guys. So unprofessional, but family is family. So yeah, I don't know how long that was. I hope I didn't lose anybody. Shoot, that was bad. Okay, just to recap where I was. So I was talking about how in tennis, what happens is you hit the ball, goes over the net, lands on their side. The opponent hits the ball, goes over the net, lands on your side. And you can attach skills to every single part of this general pattern. So let's say if I were to decompose this, right? You hit the ball, and what you can do right after that is you can figure out where you should be on the court. That's like the first skill that if you were to decompose tennis on a very, very high level, this is not it. Like this is not everything you need to know, but just on a very, very high level, abstracting away all the tiny details or even the big details. After you hit the ball, the first skill you can practice is figuring out where you should be on the court. Should you be running up to the net? Should you be backing up? Should you be running back to the center? Where should you be going? The next step is being able to, like, next skill in this step is to to be able to move yourself stably and quickly to that position. And the stably part is something that you would only understand if you. I'm sorry. Hello. Oh my god. This is disastrous. Okay. Sorry again. I think I just lost like 5 more people. But okay. So you can sort of just the idea is that you can decompose all these skills. You can like after you move quickly and stably to the ball, you can mentally prepare yourself for like what the next ball that's coming. Then you can like once the ball is hit, then you can move to where the ball is going to be. Then you can hit the best shot that you can. And generally, you can just decompose these skills, or you can decompose this practice into a bunch of skills that you can practice yourself to get better at tennis. And okay, so now you've got step one, which is to the decompose the practice in general. You can decompose, let's say, for instance, in this case, tennis, into first you've got to figure out where the ball is, then you've got to go to it, then you got to hit the ball, then you got to move back to where you're supposed to be, and yada yada, right? After you've decomposed the practice into its respective parts, what you can do then is to develop a practice for each one, right? So like figure out a way. Oh, what's up, Faith? So you need to figure out a way to isolate that skill and develop a practice for it. Let's say for tennis, after you hit the ball, to figure out where you should be on the court, you need to like figure out where the ball is land. Like there's just a bunch of things that go into it. So for simplicity's sake, I'm not going to describe it, but you need to be creating a practice for each of the individual things you've decomposed, and then you you practice that thing that practice you've just developed. So okay, and then sorry. So once you've developed that practice and then you practice it, what you need to do is compare the outcome of your practice to what it should be. So for instance, in tennis, what you can do is after you hit the ball, you compare where it did go, where the ball did go compared to where it should be. And because you've already isolated that skill of hitting the ball, then there are less variables to consider in order for you to figure out where things are going wrong and what to improve. So for instance, sometimes you might hit the ball too hard, maybe you hit the ball too soft, maybe you rush it, or maybe you go too slow. And because you've already isolated your skill, like you're not moving around and then hitting the ball and then moving around, like because you've isolated the specific skill of hitting the ball, you're able to figure out more easily what is the cause of your mistake. And once, like, this is the next step, once you've practiced it and compared it, you figure out what your mistake is, and then you add that to sort of a list of things that you need to practice. So like if you hit the ball in tennis and then it keeps on going out, you can notice, okay, I'm hitting this ball way too hard. I need to lower that. So you write, like, you either mentally, I would recommend that you write it down like on a piece of paper or on your phone. You write down your mistake so that you can basically tell your brain that it's important that you don't repeat this mistake over and over again. So like that's just the general idea of deliberate practice. You decompose that whatever thing you want to improve at into individual sections. You develop and practice those individual sections, and then you figure out what's wrong, and then you sort of repeat this idea. You repeat the part like step 2, step 3. So you practice, figure out what's wrong, fix it. Practice, figure out what's wrong. Like, you just keep going back and forth. So yeah, that is deliberate practice. Are there any questions? Sorry about all the interruptions and everything going around in circles. Okay, doesn't look like there's any questions. Maybe I've lost all of you. If I have, I'm sorry. And please let me know where the last thing that you understood. Okay, hopefully you guys have not been lost. I'm going to keep on going. So just some general notes about deliberate practice in general. One thing that's very important is that your brain will try to automate the thing that you're practicing, try to turn it into a habit, because it's a lot easier to do something that is like habitual and to like just do things automatically than to focus intensely on what you're trying to improve. And like you have to continually fight the urge to just like let your brain just do it like on autopilot, because if you let yourself autopilot, you won't be identifying the mistakes that you make, then therefore you won't be practicing the right things. You will keep on making those mistakes, you'll be reinforcing those mistakes, and on the whole you're actually getting worse even though you're practicing more. And like practice does not necessarily correlate with improvement, and that's something that a lot of people learn later on after a long time of practicing and realizing they're worse than they were before, or maybe very slightly better. So yeah, that's all I've got on deliberate practice. What we're about to do is do deliberate practice on the SAT. But are there any questions about deliberate practice before we move on? And if you're just joining the stream, I think Faith just joined a few minutes ago. It looks like if you have any questions or like, yeah, feel free to ask, please, while I set up the next step of the stream. Okay, doesn't look like there's any questions. So what we're about to do is we're going to be doing this process of like preparing to do deliberate practice on the SAT. So that sounds a little bit abstract, but I'll show you how that'll look. Okay, let's get this set up. Seems like it's loading. If this isn't load, oh, there you go, perfect. Okay. Okay, sorry about this. I thought this would be way faster, but we'll work with what we have. Okay, this is gonna look really complicated. I promise you I will try to make this as easy as possible. Ooh, this is looking kind of laggy. Okay, so we are now going to decompose the SAT. Hopefully this is not, ooh, not looking great. Okay, so does anybody happen to remember the 4 sections that are on the SAT? Or I guess the 3 sections. Okay, the 2 sections and then the 2 parts of each section. Does anybody remember that? There were 4 sections, or I guess 2 sections with 2 parts each. Oh, perfect, Iho, you got all 4. Oh, I got 3 right now. Do you remember the last section in the reading, or the math section is, Iho? You got math? No, math. No. You said there's math, no calculator. There's another. There's like a. There's the opposite of that. Yep. Bonnie got it. Perfect. Okay, yeah. It seems like it's a little bit laggy. Hopefully, it's not too much of an issue. Okay, yeah. So hopefully this doesn't get too confusing. If you guys did tree maps or tree charts. Oh, okay. My bad, Nico. So yeah, but if you guys remember what tree maps were from elementary school, this is going to resemble that. Except it's going to be a little bit more complicated slash arrowy. Hopefully it doesn't get too confusing. Let me know if it's confusing, because we can always just switch back to me talking. Okay, so we're going to decompose all of these sections, right? We've already decomposed this SAT into each of the questions. We could go into like, oh, algebra 2, algebra 1, statistics, but we're going to just go a little bit more broader. Okay, so let's start off with reading. I've sort of ordered it wrong here, but let's start off with reading. So I would say that there are 2 main skills to develop when it comes to the reading section of the SAT, and that is reading the passage, completely comprehending it, and being able to understand and answer the questions, which sounds extremely basic, but we got to start somewhere. We got to start like this is very high level, and we can develop. We can decompose each of these individual skills further. So let's just get all of this so that we have enough room. Sorry about all the messiness. Okay. So the first skill is reading comprehension. And we can also divide this into some sub skills, right? Let me know if this ever gets confusing, because I think it will get confusing. And my goal is to just clear up any confusion as it arises. So the first skill when it comes to reading comprehension is just being able to read the individual like comprehend the just sort of writing styles. So what I mean by that is like there are different ways that you can write a single sentence. For instance, you want to let's say this, you say like a red dog is standing by a tree. Very simple, right? But there are a lot of different ways that a writer can say this. You can like first of all you can just vary the order. You say like by the tree a red dog stood, or like you can say like you can use different words. You say like I don't know, sitting on like situated by a tree, like a maroon dog stood waiting, wagging its tail. Like there are a lot of different ways you can write something, and your goal is to be able to, regardless of the way that it is written, regardless of how much fluff is stuck in, you can sort of perceive what the author is really saying, which is something that, quite honestly, I don't really know how to explain how to do, and I personally developed this with practice. And Another main thing is probably the most notorious one is understanding vocab. And this is something that you can practice in a number of different ways. And I would argue that the best way is just actually just doing practice tests on the SAT because that will give you a better understanding of what type of vocab will be on there and also understanding what it means in context. But yeah, that's sort of the second of what I would consider the three main pieces of reading comprehension. The third, how do I? The third I would argue is getting the big picture because this is probably the most difficult skill, which is after you read a text, being able to figure out what the big picture is. And at this point in time, I don't plan on showing you how to do this because I personally don't know how to teach or like convey each of these things. But all of these things, if you are able to do this, get the big picture, understand the vocab, understand the writing styles, not only do you understand the small details of what's happening, but also you're able to get the big picture, get an idea of what is the author trying to say. You can get a picture of like what does the author not want to say? What is he arguing against? What is he arguing for? And this is probably the biggest, most important skill when it comes to reading. Because a lot of time, some people will say like, oh, read the questions first and then try to find where they are in the text. And the problem is that, sure, that will work with certain tests, but I would argue that with the SAT, that is not the best strategy. Not only do I say it's not efficient, but it's also not very effective because the questions on the SAT are not very I'm not sure how to explain it, but like they aren't about like, ooh, what does this word mean? Like there are a few questions like that, but it's a lot easier when you understand, okay, so this happens and then this happens and the author says this and then the character says that. If you can sort of create a mental model of what's happening, it's a lot easier to answer the questions. Like I saw this one YouTube video of like this like Indian guy, no racism, like no discrimination here, but like this like Indian guy who was like really smart, and he said like um how I answered all the SAT reading questions in 8 minutes. And what he actually did was he didn't answer it in eight. Or what he did was he read all the passages for 35 minutes, and then he answered the question in 8 minutes. Because basically what he emphasized was the fact that if you can properly comprehend what you are reading, then what you can do is not have to like search backwards into the text to find your answers. Because sometimes they'll ask you like, oh, in lines 32 to 34, the author says this. What does this mean in the context of the passage? Which is a combination of comprehending writing styles and getting the big picture. But if you like for those ones, you have to go back because you need to like check like, okay, what sentences are preceding it, like just to get the very specific nuances of what the writer is saying. But a lot of the time, there are questions where like, what is the author's purpose? And you don't have to actually reread much because you've already comprehended the piece of writing. So that I would argue is the most important skill when it comes to reading. And the second one is the second skill. Oh, the second skill is answering the questions, which sounds like a weird skill, but this is what I mean when I talk about being good at taking tests. Because when it comes to multiple choice questions, is a way to sort of game the system. And what I mean by game the system is that when it comes to questions, they tend to have like the purpose of a question is to test whether you know something. But because it's about testing whether you know something, there are very specific there are like specific sort of patterns. So I would say when it comes to answering properly answering questions, there are two main parts, which is you understand what the question is asking for, understand the question, like you understand like, oh, what is it asking for? Do I need to go back to the text? Or is this something like a big picture thing? Just understanding what the question is asking for, which I would say the majority of people don't struggle with too much. But then there's also like actually like comprehending the question's purpose, which is more abstract. It's not as easy to immediately understand. But if you are able to do this, then it'll be a lot easier to answer the questions. And what I mean by comprehending the question's purpose is what is this question trying to test in terms of your skills? So this is sort of like a meta type of strategy. I would say that on the actual test, you don't want to actively be thinking about this. What you want this to be sort of like a more subconscious process. But when you are practicing for the SAT, I would say what is this question trying to ask of me? Is it trying to see if I understand the big picture? Is it trying to understand, oh, what is he actually saying with these words, this vocab, or like, what are they trying to get out of me? And when you can do that, then it sort of eliminates some questions. And this will be a little bit more clear when we actually do practice questions on stream in about probably like once we finish up this part. But yeah, those are I would argue the two main parts when it comes to reading. Does that make sense? Is that confusing? Because I honestly think that this is a little bit abstract. I didn't realize how confusing this might have been when I was preparing the stream. You guys want to continue doing this sort of decomposition mental model type stuff, or do you want to just do like example questions on stream? Like all feedback is welcomed. Okay, looks like Eho doesn't really care. Does anybody else have an opinion? Because the more I look at this, the more I realize that this is not the most helpful thing because it's just so abstract. Okay, I see. All right, thank you for the input. I thought this was really confusing, so thank you. So it looks like we continue doing this. So because I've already sort of talked about answering questions, I would say this answering question sort of sub-skill is applicable to every single section, like no calculator, language, and reading. So I'm just not going to include it when I do talk about it. But so yeah, so I'm just gonna not be including this answer question because it's just repetitive across each section. Language, I would argue there are a lot of different skills that you can sort of focus on. So I'm just gonna be focusing on the main skills that it does test. Sorry. So the first one is just grammar, because this is the writing/language section, which means grammar is very important. So, sorry, I'm gonna just move this all over so we have enough room. Okay. So when it comes to grammar, there are, honestly, this is like a whole subject of its own, but there are a couple of things that are really common, which are like, one of the most common ones I've noticed is conjunctions, or like combining sentences together, which like, this question is really common. So like they'll have two, maybe even sometimes three, usually two sentences that they sort of underline, and then they ask you, what is the best way to combine these sentences? Usually the options are like combine it with like a comma and, or like a comma but, and then you have like another option which is like you put a semicolon and then maybe a transition verb or a transition adverb. Sometimes it'll be just a straight up period. Sometimes it'll be like a hyphen, and they want you to figure out which one is best. And once again, I would say that this is something that as a native English speaker, this comes more naturally to you. But if this is something that you struggle with, this is something that you would have to very intentionally, like first of all, figure out what the rules of conjunctions are, and then secondly, try to figure out which is most effective. And I would say in general, for the language section of the test, simplicity is always better. There are like a few scenarios I would say where like sometimes they want a little bit of complexity, but I would say simplicity, like when in doubt, simplicity. Like that is usually the best answer. So if you're stuck between like adding something or just not having it at all, I would argue like if you're so conflicted on figuring out whether you should add a conjunction or if you should just like delete it and put a period there, I would argue that simplicity is better and you should just put a period. Whatever is simpler, shorter, that tends to be better on the SAT, at least. That is the first part. I would also put vocabulary as a very important one. And this sort of overlaps a little bit with the reading section, but they're going to ask you questions like, in this sentence, they'll give you like couple of lines, maybe like a quote. They say in this sentence, what is like which of the following words is most similar to the underlined word? So let's say you have like a sentence like the I don't know, the dog was situated on the edge of the roof. And they'll ask like, oh, which of these words is most similar to situated? Is it flying? Is it sitting? Is it walking? Or is it located? And usually they'll have two answers that are really obviously wrong, which is like in this case, flying and walking. Those are not similar to situated at all. And then there's sitting, and then there's located. And my recommendation for this question, where it's like, which of the following words is most similar in meaning, is you replace that word in the sentence. So my sentence was, the dog was situated at the edge of the roof. So you can say the dog was sitting at the edge of the roof, or the dog was located at the edge of the roof. In this particular example, both of them work like basically the same. Like sometimes what you can do is when you put in the sentence, it'll be not obvious, but it'll be like you can sort of notice that it doesn't sound quite right, and you can eliminate the options. But in this case, it happens to be that both of them sound grammatically correct. So now what you have to do is figure out, is the meaning the same? And when you think about it, sitting is, you can be situated somewhere and not be sitting. You can be standing, you can be squatting, you can be laying, and you're still situated in the same place. But there are a number of different sort of verbs, or different descriptions. Whereas located, that is, I would say, basically it encapsulates the exact same idea as situated. So like sitting is sort of, sometimes I would say most of the time specific examples, specific answers tend to be, actually no, sorry. Specific answers on the SAT tend to be more incorrect, because what it does is that the more that specificity an answer has, the more narrow the possible, like the meaning of the actual answer is, which means that it's less likely to align with what the question is asking. Whereas a more general statement, a more general answer is very broad and encapsulates more meaning, which means that it's more likely to contain what it is that the question is asking. So if you're in doubt, then I would say choose a general answer. But if like sometimes the more specific answer will be correct because it happens to encapsulate exactly what the question is asking. In this case, the more broad word, which is located, they're just in the same place, it happens to encapsulate the same meaning as situated. Whereas sitting is a little bit too specific. It sort of pushes you into this corner of like, oh, he has to be sitting. He can't be standing. He can't be laying down. He has to be sitting, which is why that answer would be wrong. Was that example useful, valuable? I would say I didn't plan to be in this in depth, but I think I feel like that was a little bit useful. What do you guys think? I'm just gonna set up the next few. Like, good, perfect. Okay, that felt like a good example, hopefully. So the next thing is possessive nouns, which sounds like it's a little bit too specific to be something I test for. But I noticed that when I was taking these practice tests and when I did take the actual test, there were a lot of times where they just had, I don't know why this question is so common, but like they would ask like, okay, so let's say there's a sample sentence. They sat at the friend's table, right? So they will ask like, is it like friends, like friends? Oh, okay, sorry, friends table, or is it friends table, or is it table of the friends? Sorry, this is all in chat, by the way. Hopefully this isn't too confusing because it's easier to type there. Or is it friends table? And hopefully by the way, this is multiple friends, okay? So like multiple friends tables. Like he brought the drink to the friends table. So let me order them. So the first one, let's say first one's A, second one is B, third one is C, fourth one is D. Does anybody have any guesses to what the correct answer is? Two of them will seem correct, but the SAT wants you to give the best answer. And if you guys remember what I said before, simplicity is better. So hopefully you guys can figure out which one's the best answer. just as a reminder, I think I did not emphasize this. This is plural friends. So like, let's say like 3 of your friends are sitting at a table. You say, I brought the drink to my friend's table. Okay, hopefully that everybody who wanted to guess has guessed. And the correct answer in this case would be D. And here would be why. So hopefully you guys, yeah, okay, perfect. So hopefully you guys immediately eliminated the first one. The first one just in general is not a possessive noun, or it's not possessive at all. And yeah, hopefully you guys just eliminated the first one. If you guys have questions to why the first one is wrong, I can go more in depth about that, but hopefully that's not too difficult to figure out. So now you get to 2, 3, and 4. And this is where, like, I happen to I just sort of straight up told you guys it's plural friends. But what's going to happen in the actual SAT is that you're going to have a whole passage, and this sort of quote will be in the context of the passage. So you would have to be able to tell that this is plural friends from like the rest of the passage. But in this case, I just told you. So knowing that it's plural friends, you should eliminate 2 because that sort of spelling of friends with the apostrophe before the S, that indicates there is only one friend. So that eliminates B. So now you're down to C and D. Both of them mean the same thing. It's the table belonging to the friends. You can say the table of the friends or the friends table with the apostrophe after the S. And this is where the tip that I gave before, simplicity is better, comes in, because the SAT tests, like the sort of the instructions for this section of the exam is choose the best answer to each question. And while both answers are completely correct, the best answer is always, like when it comes to writing, concise is better. So that is why D is better than C. Hopefully that makes sense to everybody. Are there any questions on that? Okay, it doesn't look like there's any questions. So I would say the final skill when it comes to grammar, at least the grammar part, is just understanding context. Okay, we're going to go over context later on, but I'm going to talk about in this case context within the sentence, like within the sentence. This is what I was talking about earlier, where like first of all, if you read the passage, then you would know that it's plural friends. And like in this case, I told you that it was plural friends, but in an actual passage, you would have to be able to tell that friends is plural, and also context in the sense of that other example with the dog is situated at the edge of the roof. You would have to be able like to understand that it's not like because of the way that the sentence is structured, you can't just say the dog is situating at the edge of the roof. You'd have to understand that because of the way that the sentence is structured, that gives a very specific context, very specific conditions to fit the word situated in there. You cannot put a different conjugation or different spelling of situated in that case. So that's just sort of the last one. That's sort of more an addendum, not quite an important one to remember. Hopefully, the majority of people understand that. That is the end of grammar. There's one other section within, like one other skill, I would argue, within the language section. But are there any sections on grammar? Okay, while you guys ask any questions, I'm just gonna go head to the restroom because I've been drinking a bunch of water. Sorry about that. there's no way this is a Rickroll, right? Please. This can't be it, right? This is not a Rickroll. Oh, it is. Okay. Oh wait, why is it not deleting? Oh. Okay, yeah. Tempting to click. Yeah, it's too tempting. I had to click it. But oh, I should have played the video for content. I messed that up. Okay, yeah. So moving on, because we're taking a little bit longer than I thought we would on this. So the next skill is sentence in context, and there are a lot of contexts that we talk about here. So the first is the thesis statement. Sometimes they will have a passage, and there'll be a question like, what would be the best thesis statement for this passage? And if you don't already know, the thesis statement is just sort of the main statement of the entire passage. It sort of conveys either the argument the author is trying to make, or it conveys like some conclusion the author has made. That is the thesis statement of a passage. And sometimes they'll make you like, oh, is this statement, the current thesis statement good to keep in, or should we replace it? And if so, what should we replace it with? And it'll give you some options. And this is honestly probably the hardest of the sentence in context in terms of like that skill. This being able to do the thesis statement is very similar to being able to get the big picture, because once you get the big picture, then you can just sort of look at the answer choices and see which thesis statement matches up with my understanding of what the big picture of this sort of passage is. And hopefully we do end up having a question about that on the practice questions we do later. But in addition to thesis statements, we have topic sentences. And a topic sentence is basically the same thing as a thesis statement, except it's for one of the body paragraphs instead of the entire passage. And just like before, this is about getting the bigger picture of not just the body paragraph, but also the body paragraph in the context of the passage, which is kind of meta, kind of abstract. So what I mean by that is the topic sentence is sort of the leading statement or like the whole point of a body paragraph. But the whole point of that body paragraph is to support the thesis statement. So you need to be able to see if, oh, which topic sentence best supports not only the body paragraph, but also supports the thesis, because that's the whole purpose of a body paragraph. Hopefully that makes some sense. I sort of feels like I should talk a little bit more about that, but it doesn't seem like, I don't feel like there's much more to talk about it there. There's also supporting evidence. Sometimes there'll be like, what happens a lot, I've noticed, is that there will be sort of a passage, and then there'll be like a spot where, yeah, this question happens quite frequently actually, where there's sort of a paragraph, and the question is, the author is considering adding the following quote to support his or her argument. Should he/she add it, and why? So I can't really give an example because that would be a little bit complicated. I think we'll run into one of them when we do practice questions. But the general idea is like, okay, they're writing this passage, they have this argument, and they're asking, should I include this evidence? And what you need to do is be able to evaluate, first of all, what is the big picture? What is the author trying to say? And then figure out, what does this evidence really say? Does this evidence support what they're doing, or does it sort of go against what they're doing? And one subtle nuance is that sometimes it'll actually not, it'll do neither. It's not going to, it doesn't necessarily support it, but it doesn't deny it. In which case, it's more of like a distractor from the main content of the passage. In which case, you have to say, no, the author should not add it because it is irrelevant to the passage, or it blurs the author's focus, or it makes the passage more confusing. So, yeah, so like the three main things that can happen is the supporting evidence supports the thesis/topic sentence/big picture, or it goes against it, or it just goes off topic. So that's supporting evidence. And the final one is just a general sentence. And this is sort of like a weird description. But what I mean by general sentences is just like any sentence that is not the following, that is not a thesis, is not a topic sentence, is not just straight evidence. And they'll ask like, oh, should they delete the sentence? Is this a sentence value? Like, again, like a lot of this in general is just understanding the big picture. Once you get the big picture, you can figure out what's the best thesis statement, what is the best topic sentence that supports the bigger picture and the thesis statement, and what is the best supporting evidence that supports the topic sentence, that supports the thesis statement, that supports the big picture. And then general sentences are like, let's say you're talking about somebody who argues that dogs should go for hour-long walks instead of half-hour walks, and it's not evidence. They're not adding in like a study, but they're saying like dogs should also pick up their own poop. Humans are not capable of properly securing all the poop within a bag, and therefore dogs should do it because it's their own poop, and it is their duty to pick up their own stuff. And what they want you to do is, does that sentence make sense in the context of the passage? And I've already because of the example, I've already told you that the big picture of the passage is that the dog should go on longer walks, but you would have to figure out for yourself, what is the big picture? What is the author trying to say? Is the author really trying to say that dogs should pick up their own poop, or is it that authors want to say that dogs should go on for longer walks? And because I've already told you the bigger picture, you're able to immediately recognize, no, there's no point in the author adding on this random sentence. He should not add in the sentence. And the reason why is because it's irrelevant. So that wraps up the English section. Does that make sense to everybody? That was a little bit longer than I expected. I can also share a link to this, I think, actually. So you guys can also watch this live, and people in the VOD will be able to see this as well. By the way, for anybody who's new, on Twitch, there's this thing called a VOD, which is basically a recording of this entire thing. So if you have to go, if you're like, you got family stuff, you want to eat dinner, go eat dinner. Dinner is not more important than watching this live. So, sorry, before I do this, yeah, okay, so this is a link to everything. Yeah, but like, Twitch has this thing called a VOD where they basically record this entire thing, and we'll be posting that VOD on our YouTube channel. So if you're busy, you guys can leave right now and come back whenever you need to. And if you do have questions, remember that you can always go to the link in our link tree. The stream forum will always have a form for you to submit any questions that you do have. And yeah, so if you have to go, you can go. You can watch the VOD later. If you end up having any questions, go to our link tree, linked right there, and also in our Instagram bio, and we will answer your questions on stream and then post them on Instagram. So yeah, this stream I feel like is getting progressively better. I think it started off pretty slow, but it's getting slowly better. Okay, doesn't look like there's any questions. Okay, I'm gonna be honest. If you noticed, the math is on the left and English is on the right, but I still started with English. I did reading and I did language. It sort of begs the question, why did I not start with math? And this sort of goes back to what I said before, which is that I'm fortunate enough to have been gifted with my parents' genes when it comes to math. My parents are both very, very good at math. They competed in math competitions as kids, and I'm very grateful to have their genes. But the only problem is that means that I'm not very good at teaching it because I don't understand what people don't understand. So if you guys have any specific questions when it comes to this, like no calc / calc, or if you want me to just describe what's on it again, the format, I can do that. But I'm going to be honest, I don't really know how to do this. I've already decomposed it before. If you guys want to have sort of the recap, like it's just, okay, so here's no calc, here's calc, and then here are the sort of subsections. There's algebra 1, there's algebra 1/2. There's, once again, you guys can click the link inside the chat and you guys can see this all live. There's also probability / statistics, which is basically just reading graphs, reading scatter plots, understanding the mean median mode, making conclusions based off of data, that type of stuff. There's also trigonometry, which is, I should bundle this with geometry, but it looks kind of interesting right now, so I'm going to keep it like this. So trigonometry stuff like sine, cosine, just basic triangle stuff like, oh, the inside of a triangle's angles adds up to 180 degrees, and then also just geometry, so stuff like vertical angles, alternate angles, which is like they're equal to each other if they're alternate, and like sine, cosine also sort of bundles in with this, SOHCAHTOA, that sort of general stuff. If people want me to go in more depth with the actual like content of these, I can, but I'm going to be honest, I am not 100% sure of how to properly handle this. Does anybody want me to go more in depth into any of this, or just math in general? Because if not, we're going to be jumping straight into practice questions, which I think people are looking forward toward. We've also hit about an hour and a half now of streaming, an hour 40 minutes almost. My voice is starting to become gravelly. Okay, looks like there aren't any questions. So now what we're going to do is go into Khan Academy, because what Khan Academy actually has, let's see if I can get the link. Okay, while you guys get set up with Khan Academy, I'm gonna send the link in the chat. Okay, yeah, so that's the link to Khan Academy. If you guys are on your phones, this might be a little bit more difficult. I would recommend you go on your computers. You can search up Khan Academy SAT, and that should lead you to the right place. But while you guys get that set up, I'm just gonna give you guys general tips for the SAT. Yeah, I'm just gonna be talking through these at the end of the stream, and also in the YouTube VOD, I'll be sharing my my outline for the stream. Yeah, Khan Academy is amazing. But yeah, so I'll be sharing this the outline that I had for the stream, the structure that I planned out, and you guys can look at all of the stuff that I wrote down. So hopefully that's helpful. If you guys want, actually, it might be better if I just share it with you guys now. Actually, no, I'll share it with you guys at the end. I feel like that's a little more appropriate. But just general tips that I sort of caught on when I was preparing for the SAT. For Khan Academies, especially on Khan Academy, there is this like sorry, let me just get the link on here so that I don't get behind on this. khanacademy.org/mission/SAT. I should probably put this not on screen. But yeah, okay, so one of the things that is very useful about the Khan Academy the SAT stuff is that you can just like with a lot of test applications, you can eliminate options and you can bookmark questions, which sounds really basic, but the powerful thing about the one on Khan Academy is that you can whatchamacallit, what was I trying to say? You like when you submit your test, you actually can. Sorry, let me just sign in. I should probably not multitask. I'm not good at this. Sorry about this. Hopefully you guys are all logging on to Khan Academy at the same time as I am, so I'm not alone. Sorry about the delay. What is this? What is happening? Okay, like something is wrong. I'm not sure what's happening. Okay, hopefully you guys are getting on Khan Academy fine. I'm just gonna talk for a bit just because this is being a little bit annoying. So okay, my general tips for the SAT prep. So like I said before, on Khan Academy you can eliminate answers and you can also flag questions, bookmark questions. And the powerful thing about Khan Academy is that after you submit, it still records which questions you happen to bookmark, and also it still shows which questions or which answer choices you eliminated, which is extremely powerful because like a lot of time what happens on tests, at least for me, is that I'll flag questions, but then I'll come back to those questions, and then once I answer it, I'll unflag it, and then I'll answer them, and then like I'll go to the next one that I bookmarked, and then I'll answer it, and then I'll unbookmark it. But for like on Khan Academy, what you should do is keep all of the eliminated answer choices on there, keep all of the flagged questions, and then submit it. So that when you come back to review, this is sort of the idea of like from deliberate practice, looking at your mistakes, figuring out what went wrong. So you can figure out, oh, what was my thought process? Like, okay, it looks like I struggled with this question. I still got the right answer, but I struggled with the question. Why did I struggle with the question? What answer choices was I considering? Why is one answer choice wrong? And why is that other answer choice that I happen to choose correct? And this is where it's like, okay, this is take like a lot of effort, a lot of focus, and like there's no like secret trick. There's no like hack where like you can just boom, I got a 1600. You have to put in the time and the effort. Because even though I didn't put as much time and effort as other people have, like, and they haven't gotten the same scores, I still put in effort. Even though I would say that sure, I happen to have been gifted with. It sounds like I'm being really egotistical, but I'm trying to say that like I happen to do better at math than other people. I still had to put in the effort to do well. There's not something that like, oh, I have genetics, therefore I win. No, like this, you still have to put the work in, regardless of how smart or not smart you may be. So that's sort of tip number one when it comes to Khan Academy. Bookmark what you struggle with, and eliminate the answer choices that you don't think are right, so that when you review, you look back, you look at the questions you got wrong to figure out what it is you got wrong. Especially if you have to strike out the correct answer, that is very, very important because you eliminate an answer that is correct. That happened to me a couple of times actually. And also look at the questions you bookmarked, even if you got them right, because what you want to do is to make it so that you don't end up like sorry, you don't end up having to struggle again because you did choose the right answer, but you weren't sure. And what you want to do on the actual exam is to be as sure as possible and as many questions as possible. So you want to be learning, okay, what are the things that I'm struggling with? What are the things that are tripping me up? And you can do what I did, which is actually every single time I got a question wrong, I sort of extracted the lesson that I should have learned from it, and I actually put it on a document, which I'm sharing with you guys right now. That should lead to the right link. This is so like I happen to struggle a lot more with the reading and language section, so that's what's represented on these things. And what happened was that every single time I got a question wrong, I extracted the lesson I should have learned from it, and then I wrote it down on here. And before every single time I did another practice test, I read through these. I'm like, okay, I need to do this. I need to like remember to not make these mistakes. And so it's like this is the list. I took like if you look at the last edit, my last edit was on December 3rd. I took the SAT on December 4th. So like I was using this every single day that I was not every single day, but I was using this up until the day that I took the exam. So I should probably screen share this. Oops. Okay. Also, it looks like Khan Academy is working now. So just to get this on the screen. Okay, now let's get this up. Hopefully you guys can see this. If you guys look here, yeah, this is like, I got ridiculously good practice test scores. The first one I reset, but okay. So these were the reminders that I had. And I'm not going to go over them because you guys are capable of reading, hopefully. Yeah, I'm pretty sure you guys are capable of reading. So just looking at this, every single time I got a question wrong, first of all, if I ever got a question wrong for one of the reasons that the reason why I got it wrong was something I could have avoided if I had actually listened to all of these sort of lessons that I've learned, I got really annoyed at myself because this should have been a very, like, I shouldn't get questions wrong that I know how to get right. So hopefully, I'm not sure if any people are already on the document, but like, this should be very, hopefully valuable to you guys because this is sort of the lessons I've learned and it worked for me. So I'm just going to stop screen sharing this just so that I can switch over to here. So that is the first main tip. And just sort of for the actual SAT, note that you can actually bookmark questions and eliminate answers because the actual test is you just fill in bubbles on a Scantron. So on the Scantron, you can't actually eliminate options, but you can write as much as you want in the test booklet. And I recommend cross out the answers you don't think are right. You sort of circle the questions you want to return to. even though you don't have much time. So yeah, so my next tip is just in general, just like always with like any like multiple choice test, you should first of all like eliminate the ones you don't think are right, process of elimination, like always, but also skip the ones that you aren't sure about and come back to them later. Because like this is just a general like this is something you've probably heard many times, but don't waste your time on like a question that is equally valuable to a question you could get right easily. So like if it's gonna take you 5 minutes to figure out the answer to one question, but it's gonna take you like 10 seconds to figure out the question to another one, to the answer to another question that is worth the same amount, don't waste your time on the 5 minutes. Just like get the one that takes 10 seconds done and then return to the 5 minutes one if you have time. And also like you don't get marked off for putting in a wrong answer. So if you have a minute left and you have like 5 unanswered questions, I would just fill in random bubbles. And then if you have like any time left, just read the question and see if you can correct your answer if necessary. But fill in all the answers no matter what, even if you don't think it's right, or even if you haven't thought it through, because you don't lose anything by putting answers in. You can only gain. And another thing, this is something that I don't think a lot of people talk about, but the SAT is actually really like really grind numbing. Like it's just a grind. Like I remember after the reading section, which is the first section on the SAT, it's about 65 minutes. I remember after that section, I was just like incapable of coherent thought. I could not like, if you went up to me and asked me a question, I would be like, Hajima, huh? Like my brain was just like, I was so wiped after the first one, and then I realized I have another 2.5 hours to go before I'm done with this test. So this is not like, no, people. I don't think if you look on like YouTube videos, people don't really talk about how like much brain energy it takes. Because like, sure, I got the 1600 in the end, but like I can't even remember what the questions were. I was just in such a. It was almost like I was like a robot because like I just was not capable of like I can't quite explain it, but it was so torturous. And like if you already have experience with like mental endurance, mental stamina, or like that stuff, that is going to be immensely helpful for you. Because for me, I had like there were so many moments where like I was like, oh my god, dude, I'm so tired. Can I just take a break? And then I would remember, oh my god, I can't do that. I can't take breaks. I have to get the work done. But then like that would take away precious seconds that I would like. Fortunately, I was able to finish everything on time, but it was close. I did not like I for most of them, I didn't have time to check my answers. So yeah, um, that would be basically it for my tips. So now what we're going to do is go to Khan Academy. So if everybody could get to this page, um, so like if you went to the link that I gave, or you went to this SAT Khan Academy, you should probably end up on the dashboard. And then what you can do is there's a lot of stuff on here, but you can just jump over to full test. It can is there anybody who cannot get here? Sorry, my bladder is not quite functional, so I have to flush again. Okay, I don't know if people are just not here or if everybody's doing well, but for the purposes of the VOD that I've talked about, I'm just going to hop straight in. Okay, actually, is there anybody who can confirm that they can get to this page? That'll be useful, because if nobody responds, that'll be kind of important. Oh, E-host here. I thought you went to eat dinner or something. Thank you. Let's go, Nick's home. But Eho's gotta go. That's so funny. Okay, for Nick, who just got here, what we did is we just went to Khan Academy. I'll send the link in the chat right now if you want to actually do this. If not, that's fine. But we're about to do practice problems together. So we're gonna like the first section is reading. We're gonna read the passage, and then sorry, maybe depends on how good you are. But yeah, if you want to go to that link, open up this page. Yeah. So yeah. All right. See ya. Okay. So, hey Nick, are you gonna do this, or are you just gonna chill for now? Because I want to know if I need to wait for you, if you want to just. All right. Perfect. Okay. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna open up the reading section. All right. There's just stuff. For now, actually no. This is pretty basic stuff. If you want, you guys can read this, but we're gonna start this. Where's thingy? Okay. I'm gonna give you guys. I think 5 minutes is reasonable. 5 minutes to read this first passage. Okay, it's gonna be silent for a bit, and I'm sorry, but I want everybody to try to do this together. This is not an easy text. This is a novel. Let's read this together. Does anybody need more time? If you need more time, please speak now. I'm not sure how long it's been, but I want everybody to try to answer the questions before I give what I think is the right answer. Also, the goal is to end this stream by around 9 o'clock so I can get to bed around 10. Actually, is there anybody still doing this? That's probably a better question. Is anybody doing this with me? Because if not, then I can just go ahead with my thought process. if there's somebody who wants to read the text and answer the questions, please speak now. Oh shoot, okay, so it doesn't look like anybody's actually doing this with me. Okay, so are you reading Bonnie, so are you reading this passage and answering the questions with me, or do you want me to just like explain my thought process and then answer it for you guys? Sorry. Okay, yeah, sorry about that. Okay, so the first question. The narrator of the passage can best be described as A, actually, no, I'm not going to read this to you guys, but you look at this. Does anybody have any guesses to what the correct answer is? I think some of them, they should be a little bit easy to explain or to sort of eliminate, and some of them may be a little bit more difficult. Does anybody have any guesses, though? B is a good guess, but I can tell you that is probably not correct. It would be funny if you were actually correct and I got it wrong, but I do not believe B is correct. If you want, you can try to sort of explain your thought process, and I can sort of look at that if you want me to help you more directly. A. Oh wow, why am I struggling with this? Okay, so I immediately eliminate B and D, and I think this is okay to explain my thought process on this. So it looks like if you sort of comprehended the general thing of what happened, if you look at the very end, you can see this part. It said instead of beaming upon Mavis the kind of congratulatory smile that old Miss Chandler would have bestowed on her for having enlightened the rest of us, this sort of indicates that old Miss Chandler is her predecessor, Miss Vivi's predecessor, because she's the old Miss Chandler, which is probably the person who came before her, which, if you didn't know, predecessor means the person who comes before. So the fact that old Miss Chandler is referred to as sort of another person indicates that this is not being told from her perspective. So I would eliminate this one. And another one is D, Miss Vivi herself. If Miss Vivi was the one who was sort of narrating this passage, you would see a lot of I, my, we, and you would never really see Miss Vivi's name, which is why I immediately eliminated this one as well, which gets you down to A and C. My original answer was C, but when you sort of talk about A, it seems I'm a little unsure now because so based on all of this, it seems like what one of the best things to do is, can you see any personal pronouns? There's one right here, I. There's a couple of like we's down, like we here, my brother. So I think it could be this actually makes more sense. I think you are correct because it says my brother, and it's sort of the way that this is told. It's as if this narrator is a student in her class who's being taught because her brother, like, or his or her brother is in the class, and they all stood there for a minute. Like, yeah, that's actually a pretty good find. So hopefully that thought process makes sense. Is that confusing at all? I'm surprised I got that one wrong. You're better than this at me than me. Okay, doesn't look like you're confused. So question 2. In the passage, 3-step is mainly presented as a blank. What is it? This one I don't think is too difficult. Does anybody have any question or any suggestions? Also, just for reference, actually no. Does anybody have any guesses on what's number 2 is? I don't think it is C. And I think if you sort of, I think the paragraph to look at is probably this paragraph actually. Yeah, okay. You want to be looking at this. Lines 32 to 45. Bonnie, do you have a change or do you want me to just give what I think is the answer? Also, preferably we want to go a little bit faster because there are 4 parts to this thing. So oh, okay. So okay, I'm just gonna read the important part. So right here, 2 years later, starting at line 41. 2 years later, she told a cheery blue-suited woman from the WPA, which apparently means Works Progress Administration, government agency, hired people. Basically, they hire people. That she wanted to bring democracy. Oh yeah, okay, yeah. This is where it comes from before, where reading comprehension, understanding the big picture, but also the small details is extremely important because this should have been no offense at all. No, I really mean no offense, no offense, but this should be one of the free questions. So she wants to bring democracy and education to the poorest, darkest, most remote and forgotten corner of America. And they sent her to 3-step Georgia. And the key thing here is to understand what rural means. That's hard to say. Rural just means a town in the countryside or in the farm side. And this sort of lines up with the idea of maybe not poorest, but usually rural areas tend to be a little bit poorer, but it's the darkest, most remote. Because you would sort of the idea is that a rural town is a town that's sort of in the middle of nowhere. It's just sort of like a countryside farm place that doesn't have any big cities. It's not very rich. It's not like one of those big cities that are rich. They're kind of remote, forgotten. You don't really know all those cities in Kansas other than the big cities. And there's also some other sort of mentions of it, sort of this idea of um, if we look, let's see, we're just looking for examples where, or sort of evidence that shows that this is not a very rich area. Let's see, is there anything else? I think in general, just the general big picture is that she's arriving in this area that generally does not seem particularly rich. It doesn't seem particularly nice. It's 119, it's just really hot and people are sweating. It doesn't seem like it's a super rich area. So hopefully that explains that. How many questions are in this section? Looks like 8, 9, 10. Okay. So let's go on to number 3. Let's try to go a little bit faster. So it can be reasonably inferred from the passage that some of the people at the train regard Miss Spivey's comment about the Georgia heat with blank. So I guess I would argue, I'm just going to go a little bit faster, just to give you a hint. The best area to look is where they actually talk about Miss Spivey's comment about the Georgia heat, which is right around here. That's a little bit more than the actual, but I think that this is a good place to look. Do you have an answer? Okay, for the purposes of the VOD, I'm going to be going a little bit faster. I'm really sorry about this, Bonnie, but I also would prefer to go to bed soon. If you do have any, if you really do want to, go over this, hopefully you can look at the VOD, or you can just mute for now and then look at the answers later, look at the VOD. But I'm going to have to sort of go a little bit faster because this is sort of taking a while. So I would say if you read through this section, and if you don't want to hear the answer, you should probably mute now. You look at this part, you see, okay, okay, yeah, perfect. Okay, so he says, okay, this heat is nothing compared to the 119 degrees when she arrived in Timbuktu. And then she says, her remark irritated some of the people. That's already an indication it's not a good thing. It's probably negative, which sort of makes me think, okay, sympathy, probably not the right thing, which is, and this is sort of important. You have to understand what these words mean. Sympathy is sort of like, oh, I feel bad for them, or yeah, I feel, it's almost like pity. Like you sort of you feel their emotions, and like disappointment, hopefully you know what that is. It's like worse than your expectations. Embarrassment is sort of shame, hopefully you know what that is. And resentment is this sort of feeling of like not intense hate, but sort of like it's sort of an irritation, which sort of lines up with this idea of irritated some of the people. But if we keep on reading, when folks are sweating through their shorts, they don't want to hear that this is nothing compared to someplace else. Irritated or not, the majority of those present were inclined to see. Oh, actually no, this is sort of not necessary anymore. But this is sort of the key sentence. When folks are sweating through their shorts, they don't like to hear that this is nothing. And sort of this word of irritated or irritated. Those are sort of the key words. And so you have already eliminated this one because this is a positive one, and this is sort of a more negative view. And then you look at these three. Are the people embarrassed? I would say embarrassed is probably not very similar to irritated. Disappointment, I would also argue, is not quite the same as irritated. And if you understand what resentment means, then this would be clearly the correct answer because resentment is sort of like a small sort of boiling hatred, but not quite like a strong hatred. And because for this one should be sort of based off of what we were looking at. So 2 to 4, she stepped to the angle. So from here to here. I'm just gonna sort of breeze through this one. This sort of clearly does not have anything to do with Miss Spivey's comment. So I would just immediately eliminate. This one's probably wrong. 8 to 12. I believe her remark. So if you were sort of paying attention, this is exactly what we used to figure out the answer to the previous question. So this should probably be the answer, but just to look at the rest of them, we can go like this. 12 to 17. Irritated or not, they were inclined to see the arrival in a positive light. So this actually sort of indicates the opposite of resentment. So even though this implies the opposite, this resentment is towards Miss Vivi's comment, right? But what this part is saying right here is it's saying that even though they felt this resentment, they still wanted to see it in a positive light. They still wanted to ooh, hopefully this teacher is good. Even though that comment that was sort of messed up, we still hope that she's a good teacher. But that doesn't necessarily mitigate or doesn't really deny the fact that they still feel some of that resentment towards the original comment, which is why this sort of line 12 or 17 doesn't support resentment. It supports that even though they felt resentment, they they felt something else, which doesn't directly support it as well as 8 to 12. And then D, 20 to 21, she had gone here. So basically this is saying she went to school. Oh, she went to school. When she was 6, she studied French and drama, and drama. And you should sort of look at this and say, like, that is not at all related to Miss Bibby's comment or any resentment. So that should automatically be eliminated as well. So this is why this one's B. This one could be C, but B seems more strongly supported. So now, fruitful intermission. Whenever they give you a quote in a line number, always go back to the line number. So if you look, this is right here. And this is sort of what I talked about before. This sort of in context, getting the big picture. So if you just look around it, she's saying she was a woman of the world. She went to school since she was 6. She studied French and drama. And then she went on a fruitful intermission. And this is sort of when understanding vocabulary is very valuable. An intermission is sort of a short break in between a sort of other things happening. It's like an intermission during a show is like, oh, the show is happening, but they take a small break. So it's almost like a small break, and usually something else is happening during that small break. And fruitful sort of lends to this idea of, oh, something sweet, something like good came out of it. So if you just look at this one sort of already aligns with like intermission is a break where you do something else than what you were doing before. So not only was she taking a break from her studies, she traveled and she benefited from it, which sounds like fruitful to me. But if you look at the other ones, they encourage her to start medical school. There's no indication that this fruitful intermission led her to medical school, even though it says here she became a medical doctor. I would argue that fruitful intermission does not necessarily imply medical doctor. So this one's like, this still is sort of connected to this, but I would say that this connection is stronger. And then now here, early years at boarding school resulted in unanticipated rewards. Unanticipated rewards sounds like fruitful, but the problem is that it's not. The intermission refers to when she took a break in her formal education and she traveled to the Near East in India, or sorry, Near East in Africa. That is not. That doesn't have anything to do with her years at boarding school. So that's why this one you should automatically eliminate. And this one, what she thought would be a short break from school lasted several years. A lot of the time, like sort of the break part connects with intermission, but the fruitful means like something good is coming out of it, and that's why I would argue this one because there's no relationship between fruitful and several years, whereas this one very clearly benefited, lines up with fruitful, and taking time off from her studies lines up with intermission. I'm going a little bit fast here. Actually, yeah. Okay, so the interaction between Miss Bibby and Ralford serves mainly to. So what you want to do is just try to recall in your mind what is this interaction. So if you just look through here, her first interaction with Ralford is right here. There's another interaction here where it says Ralford's eye, and yeah. I remember when I did this question, I actually had trouble with this one, but it looks like other than those two interactions, there's nothing that happens. So you look at this. This interaction doesn't really, okay, so these two interactions right here. Highlight that so it's easier than highlight this. So if we look at these two interactions, and now there's no clear answer. Like, sure, like we understand that like there's sort of like Miss Bibby is explaining something to Ralford that she expects them to know. And then here she's sort of avoiding his eye. So now we have sort of the plot, but let's figure out which of these best answers the question. Suggest that Miss Bibby has an exaggerated view of what information should be considered common knowledge. Well, that sort of lines up with was the sister school, blah, 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 of which she expected we had all heard. So this seems like there's a connection here. Now let's move on to the next one, see if they're wrong or right. Establish a friendly dynamic between the school children and their indulgent and doting new instructor. This, I would say, seems pretty incorrect. Like, there's not a friendly dynamic. She's avoiding Ralford's eye. She expects that they know more than she does. She's not really indulging them. She's sort of expecting highly of them. So I would argue this is probably not the correct answer. And okay, so now introduce Ralphford as a precocious young student and Miss Spivey as a dismissive and disinterested teacher. There is some evidence of this. Ralphford is a precocious means intelligent or curious, I think. But sure, so he looks like he's curious, but then she sort of dismisses like, no, you should have already known that. So that there is some evidence of dismissive and disinterested. So we keep that one. And then D, demonstrate that the children want to amuse Miss Spivey with their questions. It doesn't really say anything about amusement, which is why I would sort of immediately eliminate this question as well, this answer choice. So now we're down to 2 options. Do you have any guesses on this? I am also going a little bit fast, and I'm not really taking the depth to explain everything that's going on in my head, but do you have any guesses between these two? Hmm. I'm going to be honest, this is pretty difficult for me. I would be honest, I think this could be argued either way. In my opinion, both answers are equally weak, not equally strong, but rather equally weak. There doesn't seem to be any major interaction or major relationship between them. So for the purposes of this, we'll just put C. And we'll go a little bit faster so that we can sort of reflect on the answers and figure out what we did wrong or right. Third paragraph, what is the narrator most likely suggesting by Miss Spivey having wandered in one situation and marched in another? So look at the lines, line 33, line 40. 33, wandered one afternoon, so let's just highlight that. And then marched in line 40. So I have sort of an idea of what, I haven't looked at the answer choices yet, but sort of the idea of wandered is sort of you just walking around and then you end up somewhere. That's what I think when I think of wandered. And when I think march, when I think of march, I think of like, oh, there's a purpose. She's doing these things with a reason or with an intention. But I haven't looked at the answer choices yet, so let's look at that. So Dewey, knowing that Miss Spivey wasn't very confident in her ability to teach, instilled in her a sense of determination. That's possible. I would argue probably not, because sure, a sense of determination sort of lines up with this idea that before she was wandering, but now she's marching. But at the same time, it doesn't feel like the purpose of wandered and marched is to say that there's not really much emphasis on Dewey throughout this entire. So this is sort of the idea of like big idea. Dewey is not really important at all in the big picture, and or even in the picture of this paragraph. Wait, maybe actually. This actually no. Within the context of this paragraph, it looks like Dewey actually has some impact. And he says like it was after this lecture and subsequent coffee that she marched off. So this could actually be a possible answer. So let's just keep this one here. Next one. Talking with Dewey over coffee made her realize how excited she was to teach in the poorest, most remote corner of America. This is also kind of similar to this. But I would argue that this sort of doesn't really talk a whole bunch about wandered. It does have this idea of like marched with intention, but it doesn't feel like there's any wandering. So I would eliminate this one just because it doesn't encapsulate everything. Because sure, this is an okay answer, but I would sort of eliminate this one. And it looks like you're gravitating towards D, and I think I am too, but I just want to get through all these. So after 2 years spending studying, she was anxious to start teaching and be in charge of her own classroom. Again, I don't really see much evidence of wandered here, so I would eliminate this one too. And finally, D was somewhat accidental. That lines up with this idea of, oh, I was just wandering around and I ended up somewhere, but then motivated her to decisive action. Decisive action lines up with marched, and yes, I would agree with you. D appears most correct. Number 8. According to the passage, Miss Spivey ended up in 3-step as a direct result of blank. Do you have any guesses on this one? Okay, so I'm not sure if you've already answered, but when I see the word direct, I've sort of had a lot of experiences with these types of questions because a lot of time I'll get questions wrong because they ask for the most direct result of, and I'll choose a more indirect result of. So when they're asking for direct, you want to find the thing that most directly led to her ending up in 3-step. So I would say one way to do this is that since this is sort of organized chronologically, figure out when did she end up in 3-step. This is probably the place where she ended up in 3-step, right? So now you want to look at the thing that's most close to that. Right before that, she says she talks to somebody at a blue suited woman from the WPA that she wanted to bring democracy and education to the poorest, darkest, most remote and forgotten corner of America, and they sent her here. That looks a lot like talking with a woman at the WPA. And if you look at Janet Miller, this is all the way up here. Janet Miller is just a friend of her grandmother who happens to be a medical doctor and inspires her to be a medical doctor, and then she attends college in New York City, which is this part. But this is all very disconnected from the fact that they sent her to 3-step Georgia. So these two should be eliminated. And then D, Miss Chandler's retirement for teaching. This actually seems like a logical thing. If she retires from teaching, then she would go to an open position. But the thing is that this is never stated in the text, whereas this is very explicitly stated right before this part, which is why I would argue that this C is the best answer. Moving on to number 9. In the passage, when Miss Spivey announces that she had seen camels, the student's reaction suggests that they are blank. So for this one, you would want to look at, okay, what does this look like? Like, where in the passage are we looking? So she says, this is the part, camels. We saw a whole caravan of camels. She looked around the room, waiting for us to be amazed and delighted at the thought. Now they want us to figure out what is the student's reaction. So we look back. We all hung there for a moment, thinking hard until Mavis Davis spoke up. To me, that looks like they just don't know. They have no idea. And this, if we look at these, delighted, this is what she expected of them, but they don't seem delighted. They have no idea what they're talking about. So this probably seems wrong. Fascinated. If in the context of just the sentence, thinking hard, maybe you could argue fascinated. But the way that it is like the way that it's presented later on is that it has Mavis Davis explaining what camels are, which sort of gives us idea that like they didn't know what these camels were before. So this is probably wrong as well. Baffled. Baffled sort of very clearly connects to this idea that they had no idea what she was talking about and that somebody else had to explain for them. So C sounds correct so far. Worried. It seems more like they're confused. It seems like more like they don't know what's happening. So it makes more sense for it to be baffled than worried. So I would eliminate that one as well. And then number 10. Which best supports evidence for the previous question? Okay, now we look at this. 68 to 69 from she looked to thought. 68 to 69. If you look at this question, the general sort of gist of this question is saying this is what she expects them to do. But this one's asking what is the student's reaction, which means that this doesn't really support their actual reaction. 70 to 71. This is this whole paragraph. This is what I was referring to very often about throughout the answering of this question. So this is probably correct, but let's look at the other ones. 72 to 74. She means like the king's basically all of this. So this is Mavis explaining what the truth or like what it was, which even though we use this to justify, oh, this is because that means they're confused. This doesn't actually explain their reaction. This doesn't really talk about their actual reaction, so this would be incorrect. And 75 to 78, this also has nothing to do with their reaction, so the answer is also wrong. Just for the purposes of time, I'm just going to submit this and see if I got anything wrong. And now we can review our grades for this section. Oh, looks like we got one wrong. So we can, if we look through the ones we flagged and the ones we got wrong. So yeah, looks like we got this one right. Oh yeah, this is perfect. Yeah, this is the one that we did get right. And now this is sort of the review process that I was talking about. And for the purposes of time, we're gonna do this one in the writing/language section, and that'll be it. Because unless you really want to do the math, in which case we can do that. But it seems like it's getting a little bit late and not many people are still here. So it looks like we didn't flag this question, we didn't mark off the wrong answer. If we were really struggling with this, we would look over every single question, but for the purposes of time, we'll just look at the ones that we flagged or we got wrong. So there's that. There's this one. We haven't flagged any of these. We didn't flag this one either. We flagged this one and we got it wrong. This is the one where I was unsure. So it looks like we eliminated the right ones. This is the purpose of the interaction. But now we'll look at these two. We flagged this one. We picked the right answer. Let's look at it. First of all, look at why are we wrong. So we thought, okay, Ralford is a precocious young student and Miss Livy is a dismissive and disinterested teacher. This isn't the purpose of the interaction. Ralford doesn't suggest that he's precocious, which I could agree with. I guess you could say like there's no indication that he is smart or clever. And this also apparently, what is this? Oh, it seems like we just have a random bug. So this choice also presents her attitude as too negative, which is also, yeah, that sounds right too, because all that was really said was that she expected that we had all heard of it. And this sort of pushes it to the extreme. She's dismissive and disinterested. This is just showing that she just expected more of us. Whereas this one, this suggests that Spivey has an exaggerated view of what information should be considered common knowledge. This is the best choice. He calls her college incorrect. She explains stuff. This interaction implies that the names of, yeah. Hopefully you can read this, but this is sort of like the type of revision or like reviewing that would be best if you want to do well in the exam or do well in the SAT. You look at, okay, why is this wrong? Why is this right? And sort of the lesson to learn from this. So here we sort of notice that precocious, dismissive, and disinterested, that's a very specific answer. Like that means Ralford, for this answer choice to be correct, there has to be evidence that Ralford is precocious and that Miss Spivey is dismissive and disinterested. And this is just far too specific as opposed to this one, which is that Miss Spivey has an exaggerated view of what information should be considered common knowledge, which is directly stated in the text. She expected that we had all heard, except she had not heard it. So this is sort of the lesson to learn is don't try to infer things that are not in the text and try to focus on things that are directly supported in the text. So that's sort of the review of that one. We didn't get anything else wrong. We didn't flag anything else. So I'm just going to hop to this one really quick so that we can sort of wrap up. Okay. Okay. So on the real thing, or like on your own, I would read this, but just for the purposes of time, I'm just going to go a little bit faster. So just reading through. I suggest that as opposed to the reading, instead of reading the whole way through and then answering the questions, I find that it's generally better to answer the questions as you go, because these questions will almost always directly relate to what is like immediately surrounding this underlined portion, except for like one of the questions which we'll get to. So question 1 of 44. Let's read through. In a 1954 Life magazine article, author John Hersey expressed concern that children in the United States were disengaged from learning how to read. Among other problems, Hersey noted, the reading material available to grade schoolers had a hard time competing with television, radio, and other media for children's attention. Okay, looks like we got to number 1 here. So they just want us to replace this with whichever is best. So if you look at it, if we just look at, okay, what is the best grammar for this? First of all, does this seem grammatically correct? As far as I can tell, looks like it's correct. Doesn't look like there's anything wrong. You have the comma here, which is a common thing that they test on. Seeing the commas here, doesn't seem like there's anything out of the ordinary. So no change seems like the best answer so far. But I'm just looking at the other ones. And with. And with doesn't make sense because you have with television, radio. And if you put another with, it doesn't make sense because you're just repeating yourself unnecessarily. So that is like That is not simplistic. It's a little bit too complex. Same thing with and also and competing with. All of those add more complexity when the simple answer is still completely fine. So that's why no change is best here. This question. One solution he proposed was to make children's books more interesting, so that an individual sense of wholeness follows and cannot precede a sense of accomplishment. So the writer wants to include a quotation that supports the topic of the passage. Which choice best accomplishes this goal? So notice that the author is trying to support the topic of the entire passage, which means that we probably should understand what the passage is about before we answer this question. So let's just skip to the next one. Flag this one for now. The Story of the Cat in the Hat publication began when William Spalding, the director of the education division at the public, read Hersey's article and had an idea. So number 3 came in through here. Began when William Spalding, the director of the education division at the published company. So first of all, to me, looks like it's grammatically correct, but there is no change option. So looking more closely at this stuff. So we say readers, oh, this is the wrong question, no wonder. Okay, no change. So far, no change looks the most correct. But Spalding, the director, if you have Spalding, the director of the education division at the publishing company, Houghton Mifflin, that just seems grammatically incorrect because you have a comma here. Why don't you have a comma here? You got to contain it. So that seems wrong. Sorry, I'm trying to consider whether it's a good idea whether to go through all of these at this point in time. There's 11 questions. Okay, we're gonna go up to question 5 just because reading all this and answering all the questions, in my opinion, is just excessive time. My voice is also starting to run out a little bit. My brain is also starting to run out a little bit. So I'm really sorry about this, but we're gonna try to do maybe 3 more questions, and I'll have to wrap up just because of I cannot really go much longer talking so much. So, and also explaining this is a little bit difficult because a lot of this, in my opinion, or for me at least, is just sort of an idea of like doesn't feel right or doesn't look right. So this clause, the director of the education division at the published company Houghton Mifflin, this all describes William Spalding. This is called in a positive. This all describes William Spalding, which means that all of this should be sort of together. When you get rid of the comma, then you're sort of combining this with all of this, which is not what it's supposed to be. This should be contained within its own commas. If you put the director in commas, then you're sort of separating the director from all of this, which doesn't make sense. So this is also wrong. And then now, if you're adding a hyphen, almost always when you have a hyphen, you're also going to end it with a hyphen, which isn't the case in here because you have a comma. So this is also incorrect, which makes no change the most correct. Spalding agreed that there was a need for appealing books for beginning readers. He thought he knew who should write one. So now this is what I talked about before. They're asking how to effectively combine the sentences. And remember that simplicity is better in almost every scenario. If it's simple and it works, it's best. And just by looking at this, which one is the most simple? Probably the shortest one. And if you just read it through, you replace it. Spalding agreed that there was a need for appealing books for beginning readers, comma, and he thought he knew who should write one. That sounds completely fine. It's the most simple. We're just going to say that's probably correct. Number 5, and just for the sake of time, for the sake of my voice, and for the sake of your sanity and my sanity, this will be the last one we do. And if you guys want another SAT stream, I can do another one. It's just that, honestly, 2.5 hours of just talking straight to a screen is not great for my throat, not great for my brain. And yeah, so I'm really sorry about that. But yeah, let's do this one. He arranged to have dinner with Theodore Geisel, who wrote and authored and illustrated children's books under the name Dr. Seuss, and issued him a challenge. Write me a story that first graders can't put down. Having known Spalding for many years and having maintained a professional relationship with him, Geisel was an experienced writer and illustrator. Okay, so now we got number 5. Which best supports the information that follows in the sentence? Well, so they're saying that Geisel is an experienced writer and illustrator. It doesn't seem like knowing Spalding for many years and having a professional relationship has anything to do with experience writing or illustrating. So no change, probably wrong. Having acquired a reputation for perfectionism and setting high standards for his work, Geisel was an experienced writer and illustrator. There's a little bit of disconnect. This is a reputation for perfectionism and high standards, whereas this one's more about experience. But both of them sort of point to this idea of competence. So we'll just keep that there for now. So now, being interested in politics before breaking into the genre of children's literature, that seems to have zero relation. And now, having published 9 children's books and having received 3 nominations for the prestigious Caldecott Medal, that one seems like he has experience. So this one seems better than this one, just because this one talks about more, oh, he's pretty good. Whereas this one's talking about experience, and this one also talks about his own experience. So for the sake of time, I'm just going to submit this section and then review it. Yep, looks like we got them all right. And none of them we flagged. So once again, I'm sorry about this, but for the purposes of time, my voice, my sanity, your sanity, we are going to be adjourning the stream right about now. Thank you so much to everybody who came. Not many of you guys are left, but thank you to everybody who came. Thank you, Bonnie, for staying around this whole entire time, listening to me this whole time. And thank you to everybody who's sort of just been lurking. Hopefully this was helpful to you guys. I really apologize that I couldn't do the full set of questions, but I'm going to be honest, I'm just so wiped right now. I hope you all had a great day. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the stream. Hopefully you guys have a great 3-day weekend. That's all I got for you guys. Adios.